Hello and welcome everyone. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. To set the context, this discussion is being jointly organized by Ivy Cap Ventures and Fandoro Technologies. And I'm Smita Mishra, founder of Fandoro Technologies. I'm going to be your moderator for the session. And quickly, the one housekeeping item I have for you is that you're going to be on mute throughout the webinar, but you can ask your questions. And if we get a chance, we'll bring it up to the speakers. If not, then we will get back to you anyways with the responses later on. Let me give you a quick background on the organizers. So Fandoro is an AI-enabled SaaS platform that empowers businesses to be planet positive by identifying and managing their sustainability-related goals, risks, and opportunities using the SDG framework, besides offering custom consulting services too. And Ivy Cap Ventures is one of the leading homegrown venture capital fund management companies in India, managing about over 1,500 crore rupees across three funds. Ivy Cap believes in leveraging global alumni ecosystems, particularly the IIT-IM network, to build technology-driven innovative companies. On the upcoming occasion of the Environment Day 2021, which will be observed tomorrow, the 5th of June, today we are discussing an important topic, ecosystem restoration, which is also the theme of this year's Environment Day. And to discuss this, we have an esteemed panel consisting of Sandeep Srivastava, who's the Group Senior Vice President, Sustainability, and Group Sustainability Cell, Aditya Birla Group. And our second panelist is Pratap Raju. He is the founder of climatecollective.net. And our third panelist is Abhishek Jain. He is the fellow and director powering livelihoods at CEEW, which is the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. I'm so glad and so happy to have you all here. So welcome all the panelists and kindly introduce yourself really quickly. Sandeep, you can start. And you are on mute right now.
So good evening, everyone. Delighted to be here. Thanks, Smita. Thanks, Mandore, for giving this opportunity. So I would like to thank on behalf of Aditya Birla Group, which is a very large and diverse conglomerate having operations in many, many countries, which is very diverse into metal, cement, and pulp and fiber and so on. So it's about $50 billion company. Now, I represent ABG from the group sustainability cell. I look after the environment sustainability there. And so all aspects of climate change, biodiversity, water, and so on. That is part of my portfolio. And glad to be here, and I would like to discuss whatever, that comes up. And I would like to thank you once again.
Yeah. Thanks, Sandeep. Pratap, you may want to please.
Great. Hi. So my name's Pratap. First, thank you again, Smita, Fandora, and Ivy Cap for this opportunity. I think the more we can spread awareness of what's happening in climate action here, I think it'll also inspire many more people into looking at this as something we can do. So the Climate Collective is actually a small nonprofit that has become somewhat bigger because there is so much action on the ground. We support climate tech and clean tech entrepreneurs. And to give you a sense, from a very quiet beginning in 2016, we've had almost 500 clean tech startups in our accelerators. That means there's a lot of innovation happening on the ground, getting past to incubation, entering the market, looking for customers, etc. Some other stuff we do is, of course, we need an ecosystem. So we have a fund called Climate Seeds to support early stage startups, and an angel network as well, because capital is also needed to support all this action on the ground and the risk taking that our entrepreneurs are taking. So I look forward to this talk for sure, and learning more also from our panel.
Thanks, Pratap. So you said you're also coming up with the angel fund, right?
We have a fund. It's called Climate Seeds. We're coming up with an angel network in about July 15th called Climate Angels Network as well.
Okay. Yes, Abhishek, please.
Yeah, thanks, Smita, and thanks, Avilu and Fandoro, for having us here. I'm Abhishek Jain. I represent an organization called Council on Energy, Environment and Water. We are a non-profit policy think tank. I've been in space for about a decade. Over the years, I've done multiple pieces of work with the government, impacting various policies related to energy, water, climate change, and broadly sustainable development. My own work focuses a lot more on issues related to access to modern form of energy for the deprived communities, rural livelihoods, as well as sustainable food systems. Among other things, I also direct a program called Powering Livelihoods. It's a $3 million initiative where we are supporting young, innovative companies, much like Pratap said, slightly more mature, helping them commercialize their solutions in a significant way, both by injecting capital support as well as by providing technical assistance to them. Yeah, so looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Great. So welcome again, all of you. And what I'm going to do is quickly set a quick context to start the discussion. And I'm going to come to you one by one and have a back and forth conversation on your area of work, and then come back to you for the next round of questions. Okay. All right. So let me start this discussion with a quick backdrop of the event. So in March of 2019, the United Nations General Assembly, they actually proclaimed that 2021 to 2030 is going to be the United Nations decade on ecosystem restoration. So, with the primary aim of to prevent, halt, and reverse the degradation of ecosystems worldwide. Now, all initiatives within this UN decade will consequently have a dual focus on protecting as well as restoring ecosystems. Now, last year, the theme for the World Environment Day was celebrating biodiversity. And the theme for 2021 UN Environment Assembly is strengthening actions for nature to achieve the SDGs. And much in line with this, the theme of World Environment Day 2021 is ecosystem restoration. Pakistan will be the global host of the World Environment Day, and the event will actually see the launch of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, 2021 to 2030. So, with that in mind, let me first come to you, Sandeep, and actually try and understand because you are between all of us, you're the one who's actually has the hands-on experience of working with so many extractive kind of industries and how they are actually dealing with ecosystem. So, I'm keen to understand that what does ecosystem restoration really mean for you, and how are you working towards it? And keep in mind that the last year's theme was celebrating biodiversity, and this year's is, of course, ecosystem restoration. So, how did you perform last year, and what are your plans for this year?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I would like to greet everyone on the World Environment Day. I think this is the time to recommit ourselves for the cause of environment. And the question which you asked about the last year's theme and this year's theme, so I think these are very intertwined and having a good relationship with each other. So ecosystem restoration, we are, as you've been saying, that having into the business of the extractive business also, so that the cement and the metal industry where we have also the mines. I would say that the things start right from the beginning. It is the life cycle approach where the right from the mine plan and during the operations and thereafter the mine closure. That continues, that you have to provide all the details of that, how you will be developing the land after its closure, how it would look like. That comes right in the mine plan. And there would be a progressive mine plan for 5 years, which is getting evaluated from time to time. And there would be a final closure of the mines. And the only thing is that when we talk about the eco restoration, it looks like that you have to bring back the land into its original shape. Now that would be a very far cry. I mean, in terms of when we have done the extraction for 30 or 40 years or 50 years and bringing it back to its original shape. The only thing is that maybe creating earlier used to be a terrestrial ecosystem earlier. While you may develop a system, partly a terrestrial one, the remaining would be aquatic one. So it would be a combination of the two. Because what happens that once you do the mining, and I'm especially talking about the open cast mining, you create the void, and whatever the overburden you have got or additional soil you may have, you might like to backfill, but that won't be enough to refill the whole thing. So what will happen there, that you would create a kind of a backfilling. There would be some pasture lands you will develop. There would be where you can have the agriculture, you can have the plantation, but then whatever the void which is left out, that is also developed into a beautiful ecosystem which is more of aquatic one. and that would be a place for attracting migratory birds and all those kind of things. So we have got examples of those mines. They've turned into a big pond of water where you have got its own ecosystem developed there. Now it comes on to the you will have certain pockets where they are still left out. Maybe the administrative block was there, or all other things where the roads would have been there when the mining activities were going on. You need to restore all of that into whatever way you can do. Now, in that case, you would be doing the plantation, you would be doing the developing a biodiversity there, both faunal as well as the floral biodiversity, because then what happens that we have the cases where we find that once you develop it, sometimes it is a very kind of a monoculture, or you may have very invasive species type things, could have been developed. So when you have been stabilizing your slopes, when you're stabilizing some of your dumps, that is a very ongoing thing. The plantation, the green belt development is also a very ongoing things. And whatever remains there, that is turned into, as I said, into a different ecosystem, as well as then you will have the other things like the more of plantation, more of those, the soil which is getting more stabilized, and you will turning into a altogether different system, which we call it as a rehabilitation of the original land and restored to certain extent. So you may have the different types of species now, and that way you can come back into this. And your second question onto the biodiversity, this is another thing which goes, because what happens that when we have got the mines, they have been also going through a very rigorous process for the environment clearance. And nowadays it is far more rigorous than used to be, after especially the Supreme Court's judgment for common cause. So there are many legal requirements are there today. One is that there is no illegalities involved, and secondly, there's the environment is to be protected there. But going beyond whatever is required by the law is your biodiversity action plan, which we have got a focus in most of our mines now. We have been covering the mines for the biodiversity action plan, where there's an inventorization of a species, where there is a special efforts for the impacts could be avoided, if not then minimized. Then you can go for the restoration of the things, and if not possible, then it finally goes into the what you call it as the offsets in a different area, and you develop that area. Now I would like to give a couple of examples. One is that in Jharkhand, one of the area was restored, and then this is what I'm saying, that is very interrelated, and you have developed the biodiversity there. It is a biopark. So you have medicinal plants, you have got the pisciculture, you have got the bamboo cultivation. So there are at least 12 types of the habitats which have been developed over there. And the similar kind of things are also happening in other mines of Jharkhand. So I stop here. Maybe if there are more questions. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, it's very interesting the kind of the nature of your business and the kind of work you're doing. I think it's one is that people do a lot of these activities. Larger organizations like your do have regulatory requirements to meet, and then there are organizations like, of course, Aditya Birlas, the Tatas, and quite a few, many of them who go beyond what is the regulatory requirement and do sustainability in true spirit. So, what I wanted to really understand further, Sandeep, I'll just probably speak to you on one more question before I move on, is what are the trends that you see in industries with respect to sustainable mining and efforts towards restoring ecosystem in your, in your colleagues or in your peers, in your other, may not necessarily be Aditya Birla Group, but in other peers of yours, and what could be really the amplifiers or the barriers that you see in restoring ecosystem? It could be, policy levels or implementations or any of them that you see that these could really help and these may not help as much.
Yeah. So that I would say again on a little bit positive note, because here I'm talking about when you ask about the big mines and the peers, and on that particular level of the mining, where there is I can see the clear-cut focus is there for the ecosystem restoration, or having whatever has been planned to be met there. Only thing which I would like to say because there was, I would like to refer a study which recently been carried out. That is the Mining Resources Foundation is there, and the global study, which says that the commitment is there for my, and they would have done for about, I think, 100 mines all over the world. So they have got the three parameters on that. One is that the commitment, the other one is the action plan, and third one is the effectiveness of those action plans. And what is the finding of that? The commitment is there. In any case, you have to have those commitments. A little bit the action lacks a little bit in terms of when the commitments are more. And finally, the effectiveness is something which is somewhere little more lacking. And this I'm saying is a global scenario, and that these are the big minds which are there. So this is something which we need to have. While there are the good examples where, when we talk about the sustainable mining, and things like the surface miners are there, and no drilling, blasting, and especially goes into the limestone mining. So you have got one surface miner that moves and just cuts the limestone on the surface, and just you take it for the further processing. Now, so that there's no drilling, blasting, or big hole you need to create there. And then you have been also taking care of the groundwater, which is not getting polluted. There are cases where the even the environment clearance requirement is there, where you cannot puncture the groundwater, you cannot go deeper than the whatever the water table is there. So those things are there, in a way nudging you to go for doing this. But referring to this particular study which has come recently, there's something more is required when it comes to the real effectiveness of the actions which are there, and reaching, when we talk about the overall restoration, there are three ways. One is the physical restoration. That is, we talk about the air, water, climate related aspects. The second is the biological one. So that is the flora faunal related. And third one is the socio-economic. So socio-economic is another very prime factor that the people which are getting affected during mining operations, they would get deprived, they would get a kind of a, the livelihood. And then you have got the efforts toward the community development, efforts for the watershed development, and number of these things are there. For the groundwater is not getting affected, and overall impact could be minimized, if not totally avoided. So these are some of the things I would like to say here.
Absolutely, Sandeep. And I think while I hugely respect what a lot of these organizations are doing, I have this feeling that somewhere in a small corner, there are some policies and laws which at least a section of us would like to find a loophole and maybe just do it for the sake of certification or sake of stamping and maybe get away with it. And not necessarily all the organizations, but there would be a certain section which would somehow probably get through it. But we'll leave that. That is a separate discussion for another day, and I'll probably come to Abhishek, to you before I go to Pratap for innovations. I'll quickly, Abhishek, because we're talking about the policies and how people are really following or at least adopting these themes of celebrating the biodiversity and ecosystem restoration. What are your thoughts on it? I see that you have tremendous experience in the research space of access to clean cooking energy and electricity. And there's so much good work that you've done in the renewable energy space also. So what I wanted to understand from you is, one is, of course, again, last year's theme and this year's theme. How do you look at them, and how is what kind of feel you get from the ecosystem? Is it really headed the way it should be? Are we adopting the themes in their real spirit? And are the policies and laws that you see around, because you amongst us, you are the one who's actually closest to them. So are these policies sufficient for us to meet, and the implementations also to and are they in place to leverage the last chance of that we have right now to somehow prevent the climate catastrophe that's about to happen? Now this is the ultimate decade, right, that we have to do it now. So, is it in place?
Yeah, thanks, Vita. I would say, a lot is happening, but we need to do a lot more. That's really the short answer. And just to connect to the two themes that we are discussing, the last year ones and particularly the this year one, which is on the ecosystem restoration. I mean, when you look at and land and water are really two large, big ecosystems that we are talking about, right? And Sandeep talked a lot about land ecosystems and some of it actually getting converted into aquatic ecosystems as a result of restoration, post-quarrying, etc. I think when we talk about land, of course, one of the largest uses of land that we have is on agriculture. And we have and then not just in India, but globally, if you look at, I mean, every year more and more land is getting deforested, or our forests are getting deforested because we are diverting that land to agriculture, at the same time, the agricultural land, which is on the fringes of the urban areas, is getting consumed into the urbanization. Right. So at one end, you are moving more and more land into the urban settlements. At other end, you are encroaching more and more forests and some of the pristine ecosystems to convert towards your agriculture requirements, because at the same time you also need to meet the food requirement of the globally growing population. And I would actually like to stretch ecosystem restoration to one next level and talk about actually even nature-based solutions. We are not just restoring the ecosystem, but you're actually leveraging the ecosystem to help you fight challenges like climate change. We are not just uh, doing the minimal which is required to make sure that you are going back to how the ecosystem was, but you're actually leveraging some nature-based restoration to improve the situation and potentially absorb more carbon in the process, so that you can actually see that light at the end of the tunnel, that yes, by end of this decade we have not necessarily dealt with the solution problem fully, but at least put in place the necessary pathways and the solutions which we need to then continue moving forward on. I think this decade is very critical from the perspective of establishing those lock-ins. If the lock-ins will get established in the right direction, there is a lot more that we can do then in the coming decades to ensure that we are able to meet or keep ourselves in various planetary boundaries, which right now we are encroaching on many fronts. And on agriculture, to just give you a few concrete examples, right now when you look at the policies, most of the policies across the world, including in India, are primarily promoting resource-intensive agriculture, which means that your lands and soils are getting degraded more and more over the years. Your water sources are getting polluted by runoff of the fertilizers, etc. So policies in that sense are, I think, significantly falling behind in terms of where they need to be. And right now, of course, the focus is to ensure food security. But while we are chasing one goal, we are ignoring many other. And that's really been the problem of this unidimensional thinking when it comes to the development which we have seen over the last century. And this is where we need to change that from unidimensional to multidimensional, and that's where a lot of our effort has been going in over the last few years, particularly on the just continuing with the theme of agriculture. Uh, just a couple of months back, we released a massive report on sustainable agriculture practices in the country, in India, and which collectively have a potential to completely reverse the degradation that we are seeing in our ecosystems and restore them, not just to ensure that we have complete nutritional security, but also ensure far more remunerative incomes for farmers, much more social cohesion between the communities, especially when small and marginal farmers form the bulk of it across the globe, particularly in developing countries, but also across the globe. So yeah, so looking at solutions, things like natural farming, which are not just improving nutrient content in the food, giving us chemical-free food, but also helping us restore lands, helping us restore biodiversity, helping us restore soil health, are really the way to go. And there are already, in fact, at sub-national level, I think more interesting things happening right now. For example, government of Andhra Pradesh has fully embraced natural farming. They want to make each and every farm in the state, and there are about 6 million farms in Andhra Pradesh, completely go natural farming way within the next 5 years. So that would be a phenomenal transformation. A state which has been almost a flag bearer of what you call the green revolution-led agriculture would almost completely shift itself into a form of agriculture which is not only going to be Again, good for the farmers, good for the consumers, but also good for the planet. Yeah, let me pause there with that example, and I'll be happy to come.
Yeah, very beautifully shared, Abhishek. Thank you. Just to understand, because you mentioned this Andhra Pradesh example, how do you look at your other peers and other, do you have many such examples coming up, or these are one of the spikes that somehow these are the outliers and you are seeing one or two of them, or is there a trend you are seeing? And in general, what is the view of your peer researchers and the government teams that you work with or meet? What are their views? Is what is the trend that is going on around ecosystem? Are they actively pursuing the restoration through, whether it may not necessarily be a policy change, but in implementation or making some changes there? What do you see?
Yeah. Uh, I think there are things at different stages in different spaces when you look at. I mean, when you look at energy space, for example, in the country right now, where the policies are headed, I think that is one of the forerunners in terms of really embracing a lot more renewables, lot more distributed energy, which is really what the future is like. And India has one of the disproportionately more ambitious targets when it comes to renewables compared to many other developed and developing countries. Right? I mean, 175 gigawatt of solar as well as wind, some bit of biomass. These are really significant targets. So, and once the policy gives you that signal, markets start moving alongside. You have seen how the prices of renewables over the years have come down significantly. That now it is at par or at parity with some of the conventional forms of energy. And that's really the big push that the policy can bring in, the direction which you really need to show. Similarly, allied sector to energy, and maybe at the intersection of energy and transport, is e-mobility, where you again see a lot of commendable policy moves to really put a pathway that, okay, how we want to mainstream electric mobility, e-mobility in the country in the coming years. And then the private sector, the young entrepreneurs are sort of taking on that battle and really translating that policy vision into action on the ground. Uh, but when I talk about, again, agriculture or some of the ecosystem restoration from that perspective, I think right now I do see a lot more action and inspiration happening at the subnational scale. Andhra Pradesh was one example, but now taking inspiration from Andhra, Himachal Pradesh has actually gone a big way in natural farming. Already close to 100,000 farmers, about 1 lakh farmers who have started experimenting with natural farming in their farms and finding phenomenal results there. So again, I think different spaces, some have moved far ahead of the curve while others are trying to chase. If you look at water similarly, I think there is a lot more to be done even on water restoration front. Uh, our groundwater tables are depleting at a phenomenally rapid pace, and we're staring at massive challenges. And one of the biggest way in which actually climate change manifests itself is in the form of water crisis. Whether it is flooding, whether it is droughts, whether it is less predictable rainfalls, whether it is more cyclones, water really becomes a way in which climate change manifests itself. So it's important to keep a close eye on how we are managing our water sources. In fact, there again, we see a lot of potential. Incidentally, 70% of our water withdrawals are primarily for agriculture. So if we are able to actually reshape our agriculture again in a way which is more sustainable, it can even change a lot on the waterfront as well. So I think people are certainly realizing it, but it is also the political economy, this very strongly entrenched political economy around each of these sectors, which make the pace of change slow. If I now talk about that, okay, let's move from conventional IC engines to electric vehicles. A lot of the incumbent industries would find it uncomfortable, at least to start with. And there is a pull and push. There are lobbying which are making the pace of change slow. And of course, everyone has their own interest in mind, and it is not something that is necessarily incorrect. But the point is, how do you solve for it? How do you create a transition pathway which not only keep the future in mind but also keep the existing players in mind, and create a transition pathway which is less hurting, if not entirely non-hurting, for the incumbents. And the same we think even needs to happen when it comes to agriculture. We have large fertilizer companies. Of course, as you move away from chemical-based agriculture, their incentive structures will completely go for a toss. So how do you bring them along by creating transitionary pathways which ensure that there is some win for them also, or some rehabilitation for them also in the process? Otherwise, I think what is easy is knowing what needs to happen. What is difficult is to know how it needs to be done. And usually it is that how where most of the reality hit the on ground, or as you say, the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with you, Abhishek. And it seems like agriculture happens to be your favorite space. So you'll go round and round and then come to the agriculture to somehow fix it. And I really appreciate that you sharing all those details with us. So let me now come to you, Pratap. We heard Sandeep, and his organization is doing tremendous work in the space of sustainability. And I also looked at his profile. He's done some awesome, great work in the past, also in the various other organizations. Clearly, there are organizations which have an intent to work in this space. Now, when I hear from Abhishek, yeah, he very openly said that there are equality is, of course, falling back in some areas. But when we actually consider these two situations, that there are corporates which would like to implement solutions, and there are policies which are probably falling back, or there are implementation gaps, it forms a perfect scenario for innovations to come. Innovations where these corporates can be served with or without the policy requirements. Would you like to highlight from your experience, considering again both the teams, the last year's team and this year's, and how innovation is playing a role in ecosystem restoration?
Right, great, thank you. So I may start though on the energy side before coming to conservation, because there's a lot of interesting things in this space. I used to be a solar developer, starting from the 2009, 84 megawatts on the ground. Eventually, I know from experience that it's easier to sell solar to corporates and private players when the cost is low. And it's easier to be in line with the government. Government was very supportive, of course, at the beginning, but it's perhaps interesting to guess if solar prices did not fall so much, how much our commitment to solar would be in practice in terms of targets. So I think there is a role that technology plays, especially in making it easier for these transitional paths to sustainability that Abhishek was talking about. Of course, solar was strongly innovation on the financing side. We had our technology in solar for decades, this crystalline technology since I think the 50s. But there was a lot of entrepreneurship on the ground, a lot of innovation on the financing to make this happen. So I think that's one lesson. Normally, when we talk about environment, climate, we talk about important areas around policy, leaders, and we talk about capital that's needed, and as well as the role in particular for corporates to play. Sometimes we do talk about innovation, but it maybe doesn't get as much attention, and it's okay. I will point out there's a nice report from IEA, International Energy Authority, that kind of looks at if we were to get to net zero emissions by 2070, what technologies already exist on the ground that are mature or already in early adoption, and the numbers, at least in the studies, something like only 2/3, already exist. We still have to invent, discover, and create solutions on the ground that don't exist today if we want to reach this target. And if you aim for 2050, that the imperative is even stronger. So I think that there is a role for entrepreneurship in particular to create new solutions. Entrepreneurs in particular take risks oftentimes that others who may have more resources or even technical access to capabilities may not. And that's where we see a lot of activity on the ground. I'll share one example again on energy, and then share something we did in India last year in a program called Electron Vibe. There's a great startup in France called Energy Pool. What they do is they've rewired the 435 corporates to turn off demand in 30 seconds, 5 minutes, 30 minutes, so that instead of having these spinning reserves, which means when you have a shock to the grid, you need this backup power. You can just you can just rely on corporates in a more cost-effective way to balance the grid. Now in India, we don't just have spinning reserves; we have load shedding, which is even worse. Which is why all these DG sets are everywhere, all our costs. These are something that it was not a large corporate, like Schneider Electric to develop. It was a small startup. Schneider eventually did buy them. Now we see the same thing happening here. We ran a program called Electron Vibe last year with Discoms to try to connect energy startups for solutions that can help the grid in these same really easy payback solutions, investments that make the grid stronger and save money. In fact, you have technologies here that we're seeing, drone technologies that help maintain transmission lines at a lower cost, etc. I think what we are seeing in today's world on innovation is an explosion of talent trying to solve a lot of our climate and environment problems. When I started, it was much quieter in 2016 with, I think, India's first solar hackathon. Today, I gave you a number, almost 500 startups just in our accelerators, and that's a reflective of what's the activity on the ground amongst our entrepreneurs. So I do think there is a role to a strong role for entrepreneurs play, and it's perhaps in the way that Abhishek was talking about how policy can design transitions to sustainability that is less painful, and I think technology perhaps can help in that on the ground by actually offering products or solutions to business, to consumers, to make those choices to become sustainable easier. Now, that's sort of the kind of the theme that we're seeing. Conservation, of course, is a little tricky because it's not as easy a space for entrepreneurs. It's a complex area that often requires a lot of more policy and large organizations. However, we do know that we do talk about climate change, but when we talk about circularity, when we look at how much material extraction that happens and that goes to our country and development needs and globally, this is where entrepreneurs can play a role. In fact, we see, especially in the last few years, an increasing focus on circular economy startups. This may not directly deal with restoration, but it does give a little more time for people to get more value out of the extraction, that's by upcycling and reusing in many ways. We see more design solutions. For example, the old days, I'm from a small village outside of Visakhapatnam, and people will come in, drop off goods at our house, and then pick it up after, instead of the idea of a shop. We do have these startups coming out here as well to explore whether this also reduces, in particular, the packaging problem that we face, plastic waste problem that we face in consumer goods. So I think today we have an equal number of circular economy startups that we're seeing on the ground here as we do in the other areas like clean energy in particular. And particularly so in the last 1 or 2 years, especially in upcycling, which is not as strong a technology domain for startups, but it's an amazing green entrepreneurship space where we could see numbers like tens of thousands or even lakhs of great micro green entrepreneurs that can solve problems of waste locally, as well as something, especially post-COVID, create a very strong green recovery at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent, Pratap. That's a lot of good work that you are facilitating, and I think there's a lot of good activity happening. This kind of vibrancy is really important to probably bring out innovation. Quickly, a follow-up question on that is, though, since you already said, I think you said 500 startups that were there in energy, and then 500 in recycling also. Sorry, circular economy also.
No, 500 across all clean tech, yes.
Yeah. So just to a quick follow-up to that is, have you seen some of them really, or any of, can you have a couple of examples of those startups which are really scalable, like where these solutions scalable? And another is, I remember having this discussion with you about whose responsibility is the affordability of these solutions. That if you're building a new technology, then you have to make it affordable also, because then that's where the adoption really happens. So are these startups something that you see a lot of value in, that yes, at least let's say 5% or 10% of them are such, which can be sold, which are going to be very affordable?
Right, right. So, of course, in our country, and also not just in our country, affordability is a key attribute of new solutions for sure. But it's not the only one. Now, we sometimes seem to assume that it has to be below cost. And in fact, I saw this great startup here in Bender West where they were showing me something selling to me, and I'm an upper middle class consumer, and price has less, at least for me, for some eco-friendly I think products like spices, has less of impact. She was telling me the attributes of how they grow this, from a sustainability point of view, about to cross the sale, and then told me I can give it to you at 10% discount, and I'm thinking, but why? I love it, right? I would take it now. That doesn't mean, of course, I'm the typical consumer. I'm not. I'm saying that price doesn't matter. I think one thing we should do is let more experiments happen. Now, entrepreneurship is different from projects. Projects in solar, you identify something. We see a lot of startups now using social cues and social media because we sometimes forget that sustainability has a communal value or community value with it as well. And using social cues may get other people, especially upper middle class in particular, to take products that may not have to always be low cost. Now, we do know that oftentimes, and for a lot of our consumption, is not is we all classes consume goods, but there is a special impact that those well off in the cities have actually on consumption. And in my view, you start where business works, right? So a lot of startups come and say, we really need to get this to lakhs and maybe crores of people in India. It's great. As a startup, you need to make your first sale to 10,000, right? And sometimes things happen, you get scale, you can bring down costs, and you see the market go down. So we don't try to focus on something like affordability. We focus on value. And if you can find a model that works, then it's very positive, and you become a sustainable model. I'll give you a great startup on in this model. It's kind of cool. It's called Brook and Bloom. I think it's 2018 in our program. They were taking devotional flowers that was thrown out in bananas that goes into in Ganga, and they were taking that and creating fertilizer for farmers. Solves this waste problem pretty good. Problem is that for farmers don't have as much buying power, purchasing power. Of course, our farmers generally, and this startup could not get the scale of larger companies. So then they realized, wait, what am I selling? I'm selling. Well, it did seem like fertilizer. In fact, they're selling partially spirituality. This comes from devotional flowers coming from bananas. So they started selling this to upper middle class homes in Delhi at 5 times the price that they would have sold to a farmer, creating a sustainable business at the same time solving a waste problem. So sometimes, of course, this is a big problem. We do want to have large solutions, perhaps like in energy, like solar and wind do. But in a lot of cases, especially circular economy, imagine if we had thousands of small solutions. Sometimes we think that scale is good, and of course, it is good, but there's no reason why we couldn't have a very rich set of entrepreneurs solving a lot of micro problems, especially in circular economy, that are good local businesses and solving problems profitably.
Absolutely. I think I've heard of Fool.in, right? It's Fool.in or Fool.co. I've seen of that. PHOOL, right?
Yeah. No, this is called Brook and Bloom.
Okay, Blue can Bloom. Okay, there is similar one here, Fool, which is selling a lot of devotional flowers and fertilizers in Delhi. I was like, wow, this is also a business. But it's good, right? At least it solves sort of waste management issues also. So, coming to you, Abhishek, very quickly on and before, because I want to hear from Sandeep details on how ABG has implemented net zero and science-based targets. But before that, I would like to hear from you, Abhishek. What do you think about these terms? Are you seeing a race of people trying to, somehow publicly declare that I'm going to be carbon zero, net zero, or carbon neutral by so and so date, or something like that? Are you seeing something to that tune?
Yeah, thanks, Smita. Before I answer that, I just had one parting thought on the earlier discussion we were having around affordability and the scale of startup innovations, etc. And just sharing something from our experience with Powering Livelihood, we have quite a few of these companies which have created clean energy-based solutions which can help generate rural employment and enhance rural incomes. And we see that market itself going upwards of 50 billion US dollar if we really have to capture it. And this program is just trying to catalyze that market really to start with, so that it can go on its own. And there, if you see and look at many of the solutions, actually, just going by what Pratap said, I mean, it is not really about the low cost. It is really about the value for money, which consumer is looking for. As long as we're able to deliver and generate that value, people are lining up to get some of these seemingly expensive technologies as well. But if you're not able to create a value, even a low-cost technology will not go very far. One interesting example there. In India, there's an annual market of close to 30,000 crore rupees. That's almost 4 billion US dollar, just to sell fresh green fodder for animal and cattle. And there is a significant shortage of that commodity in various parts of the country, especially semi-arid and arid regions. And here's a company, it's called Hydro Greens. They created a solution which is a vertical farming station, which you can really put literally in your backyard. It's so small and can cater to 5 to 6 animals if you are a small farmer or an animal rearer. It runs on a very small solar panel. It uses renewable energy. It uses less than a bucket of water to grow fodder, which is sufficient for 6 to 7 animals. So you are able to save a lot of grazing land, which otherwise would have to be spared for cattle feed, etc. And in the same time generate a lot of value through renewable energy and at a cost which is very attractive for these animal rearers. So yeah, so there can be actually win-win-win, but you still need to catalyze it through initial support so that it can scale up on its own. Yeah, just wanted to add that there. Now coming on to some of the terms that you mentioned, whether we're talking about net zero, carbon neutrality, uh, I think there is, I mean, there is action, but before action, there are two, three things that happen in human minds which lead to action. Uh, and and those are like the narratives which come before the action and commitments. You start hearing things, and even before that, you have the mindsets. And what happens when you see such terms and a bit of a race or momentum around such terms? It starts changing the mindset and the narratives, and only then the action follows. So even if in the short run you may see that okay, is it really going to change a lot of things? It may not, but it will at least sow the seeds for action to follow by changing narratives and mindsets. And that really I see a big value of these campaign kind of things, which help you take many more people forward along with you. Now, when we talk about net zero, of course, right now the debate started with countries making commitment towards net zero. Then it moved on to large businesses started to make that commitment, and I think there's a lot more that we will see in the lead up to COP later this year. And in the past, there have been also campaigns like RE100, where a lot of large companies have signed up to be 100% renewable energy by 2025 or 2030. Then we have seen campaigns like EV100, where they want to change their fleet towards completely e-vehicles and so on. So in that spirit, I think these campaigns or the momentum that gets created around some of these terms do help a lot. But eventually, it is also about the pathway. Without really understanding how we will do it, if we are only going to make commitments for the lip service, of course, that is not going to help us a whole lot.
Absolutely, Abhishek. Coming to you, Sandeep, these are some terms which I'm seeing many large organizations using. So, firstly, does Aditya Birla Group also, do they have some publicly stated goals on any of them? And what do you think about these goals being a trend now?
Yeah, right. But I'm tempted to, go a little bit what was the discussion earlier, what
Yes,
I
please.
was raising on the circular economy and then the circularity. And these are very closely linked with the climate change and also our themes on biodiversity and ecosystem restoration. Because, I have some examples to say that if like in the metal sector, if you have got more and more of recycling of the same material, like we do a novelist, they have got this can of the beverage can that can be recycled and number of times. And the only thing is that beauty is that the energy and the material requirement would be 90% less when you have got this recycling of the thing. Another example that comes into the cement sector, and this is also very, very interesting case, wherein the clinker, which is made out of limestone, is getting replaced by fly ash and slag. And these are the waste materials of the thermal power plant and the steel plant, right? And those are the getting mixed, and the cement quality and all that would be as a BIS standard in India. So there is nothing like inferiority or any such thing in terms of when the cement comes. Another thing which is there again in the cement sector is the replacement of coal by some of the other waste materials which are organic in nature, combustible. And this is the entire range of the products which are getting burned in the kiln. And kiln temperature itself is about 1400 degrees centigrade, so it takes care of that waste well. And of course then you meet those emission norms in any case. So the thing is that the paint sludge, or you have got oily refinery sludge, and a lot of plastics today which is non-reusable type getting used in cement industry. And you can imagine that how much coal you can save by just burning the, otherwise the waste would be lying here and there, and they're creating one problem. Now the coal, suppose you replace, many times we think that we are avoiding so much of the carbon dioxide, right? And similar thing also comes in renewable energy, that okay, you have done away with so much of quantities of coal and so much of CO2. Yes, that is true, but we tend to forget that there are so many other benefits also, and these are tremendous benefits. When you talk about dust pollution, when you talk about the the SOx NOx emissions, when it is the transportation related emissions, and another important thing is the water which goes into the thermal power plants to make the steam out of coal. So that is the kind of thing which we see here. So having the climate change related impacts as well as onto so many other collateral, you can say, benefits which are the out of the circularity which we need to do it. Only thing is that when you make these kind of products, the green cement or green concrete today by the C&D waste getting recycled, in the concrete, replacing some of the fine material and coarse material. The thing is that there has to be some incentivization. There has to be the customer awareness where they tend to buy those products, so that the entire policy backup that might come into play there. Now, specifically onto your question about that the carbon neutrality related targets. So I would say at a group level, because a very, very diverse group, we don't have any such declaration in the public domain, though we have got our own targets internal to meet. But then a business like Hindalco, which is a metal industry, aluminium, they've got a carbon neutrality target about 2050, sorry. And Ultratech, they have got a science-based target related declaration by 2032. They would be meeting that. What I feel that whenever we have got these long-term vision, which is very important for 30 years, but we also should have the shorter term and medium term vision. So what I'm trying to say that those targets should also be there in the public domain, so that we would know that this company would do in 5 years and 10 years where they will reach, and that is far important just than to have a kind of a 30-year kind of a target. So this is my personal view that this kind of target would be there, and internal target should be even on a year-to-year basis, because that the monitoring becomes easy, and where you need to have the catch-up required, that can be done, and that way you will be able to read there. And the other thing which I would like to say here, whenever such kind of declarations they come, there has to be the roadmap should also come along with it. That how will you meet that? What are those levers you will apply to be reaching there? Of course, some may be the very futuristic ones. Some may be the ones which are going to be there in 3 years, 4 years time, as you can forecast. So I realize that is very easy, very difficult rather to go for that kind of the forecasting. Even growth forecasting is also very, very difficult for having for 30 kind of thing. But whatever the kind of things that how much with the kind of knowledge you may have, there has to be a proper roadmap made that this is how we will meet our target for carbon neutrality. And even in terms of the 10 years targets or even 5 years target, you come out with your roadmap. Yeah.
Absolutely, Sandeep. I don't think it will be a very scientific idea to do it at a group level for an organization like yours, which is in apparels, which is in cement, which is in mining. So, because each group will have its own challenges and exposure to resources and level of extraction and kind of work. The association and engagement with nature will be very different. So I think it's in fact scientific to actually go group by, I mean, particular industry by industry. So, well, we only have 3 more minutes. I wanted to really understand about SDGs. So, very quick, yes or no? Do you measure your work in terms of SDGs? Yes or no? Right now,
So
or plan to do it in future?
for me, so yes, I think SDG is core of everything. In fact, if I'll take one example of only one SDG,
Yeah,
that is your SDG number 12, the responsible consumption. That itself will take care of your 9 other SDGs. That is what is we are talking here, the circularity.
true.
And so that is my most favorite one, the SDG 12. But of course, then you have got, and that is why that takes care of climate change, that takes care of the biodiversity, the below water again, life, the life on the land. Then you have got anti-innovation things. So you have got many, many of these. And our business-wise, we have been mapping on the activities and the SDGs. So how our activities are related, and I'm pretty sure that out of 17, at least business like us would be at least having the interventions, including the community, maybe at least 16, 17, all of them maybe,
All of
or
them.
maybe even not one would have been left,
True.
because. But yeah, but there may be degree might be different. Sometimes you need to do more in certain areas. And when we talk about 160 sub goals, you may not be working in all the 160 ones. So that I agree with that. But at least would be touching and in quite big way into almost all of them into there.
All right. Pratap, any idea on SDGs? Are we doing something like measuring, mapping your startups with respect to SDGs?
Kind of funny, but yes and no. If you're in the climate space, when I was a solar developer, people would tell me how great it is or how noble it is, and I'm trying to make a buck. I'm trying to survive and make a profit on something like this. And in fact, our entrepreneurs are so focused on sustainability financially. I think the approach we take is as long as it's positive for the environment, at least for entrepreneurs, the real goal is making sure your business is financially sustainable. You're creating business value for someone so that you can grow, and by growth is where you get impact. So it's really not as sophisticated as, for sure, like Sandeep had Aditya and large corporations and the government. I think it's a little simpler for us here in the entrepreneurship world.
And don't worry, platforms like ours are coming to you, don't worry. So, Abhishek, anything on SDGs that you specifically work on or map or measure?
Yeah, I know almost everything, and most of our work ultimately moves around with this large vision of impacting SDGs at scale. So that's what it is. I mean, of course, we do not necessarily work on themes like education or healthcare directly. We still try to positively impact them by working on things like solar for healthcare or renewables for education and so on and so forth. Right. I just want to add one more point. Sorry, I know we are running out of time. I think when we are talking about net zero, and this inspired from some of the conversations between Sandeep and you, uh, I think it is very important to set interim milestones. We cannot simply say, I will keep burning as much fossil fuel as I like by until 2049, then suddenly drop it to 0. Right? Because what you have emitted between now and then would actually matter a lot for the climate pathways that we see or the future of the planet. It is important to also set targets for 2030 and 2040 if we are looking for a net zero target by 2040. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. That is what when I was listening to Sandeep, in my mind, because my work is more around, helping enterprises adopt sustainability. So we also review and do the audit. And what I realize is, if you really have a 30-year goal, how do we really audit and make sure that how do we do your course correction? How do we validate that you are on the right path? Because in your audits and reviews, we have to ensure that you are sticking to that path, and then therefore you have to have a gradual progression towards that goal. You can't suddenly say that in the last year I'm going to drop it to zero. That
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. So thank you everyone. Thank you Sandeep. Thanks Pratap. Thanks Abhishek. It was so much fun having discussions with you. Thank you all the attendees who attended. I'm sorry we don't have any time left for the questions, and but we're going to. If you have any queries, feel free to reach out to them. They're very very kind and warm people. I'm speaking to all of them for the first time, but it doesn't feel like that. So please reach out to them on LinkedIn. Pratap can definitely guide you on your any clean tech, climate tech entrepreneur initiatives. Abhishek is of course researching on a lot of policy stuff, so he can guide us what to do, what not to do, and how to do it. And Sandeep, yes, chase him for all kind of business that we want from him. So,
Okay.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you,
Thank
Smita.
you. Really enjoyed. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank
Yeah.
you, Abhishek, Sandeep, as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
indeed. Thanks, Sandeep. Thanks for that.
Thank you.